You can't sell it. You can't keep it. You definitely can't rent it. What are you going to do? Today, we're going to talk about the Ontario cottage country market and whether or not it's actually collapsing. I've heard people say, I can't sell, can't keep, can't rent. And my question to them is, how did you get into this situation in the first place? A quick Google search under the news tab will show you that there are a number of headlines out there saying how short-term renters took over cottage country. The market looks very, very different. They bought during the real estate rush. Now they're losing up to $365,000. The market is crashing. The sky is falling. Oh my goodness. And I'm here to tell you that's not necessarily the case, because today we're going to go behind the scenes, show you the data that I look at on a daily basis on what the numbers are actually saying, particularly for Muskoka. Now, this does apply in large to other parts of cottage country like Parry Sound, Haliburton, and the Kawarthas. But just to keep things simple, we'll keep it to one region for today. Then I want to touch on these folks who can't sell, can't rent, and can't keep it. And then finally, I want to talk about what the opportunities are for you if you're looking to either sell or buy in cottage country in the coming months. Really quick, my name is Ben Robitaille. If you like videos like this, consider subscribing. We put out new videos every week to help people navigate the real estate market in a way that's real and makes sense and cuts through all the noise. So I'm going to share my screen here and show you the data that I look at on a daily basis to tell me what's going on in specific markets. Now, we've zoomed out. We're going all of Muskoka, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper and just go to detached homes. Now, this is everything that is sold from January 1st of 2020, so right before this crazy event happened to the world, and September 30th of this year, 2025. So let's look very carefully. This is average price. Cottage country always has peaks and valleys. You're going to have peaks in the summer, valleys in the winter. It's just the nature of how this market works. So you can see, very beginning of the pandemic, the average price was $556,000. If we scroll all the way forward to September of 2025, average price was $1,091,814. Now that is a huge jump in 5 years. And when I talk to my clients, we always talk about this concept of the 5-year hold. If you're getting into real estate, at a minimum, you want to hold it for 5 years. My outlook when we look at pricing is I want you to be able to turn around and sell this place in 5 years, cover all your, commission and closing costs and all the fees that are associated with selling a property, and at least break even, if not put some money in your pocket. So if you'd bought, let's say January 2020, let's go to January 2025, you probably would have been okay. More than okay. You would have had a sizable down payment for the next place. That being said, we're talking about, people losing hundreds of $1,000s on their cottage. If they bought at, September 2024, when the average price was 1.5 million, and then tried to sell it a couple months later in February because they couldn't carry it anymore, yeah, they're going to take a loss. But I'm going to bet these are one-offs and not the wider picture of what's actually going on. Now, with average price in these areas, it's important to keep in mind the number of houses that are actually selling, because that's going to affect our average price as well. So if we look at transaction volume, again, peaks and valleys, we're in cottage country. So at the height, 269 sales. At the valley here, we had 60 sales, right? Then we go back up in the summer, 242 sales, 49 sales. So this continued on all the way through the last 5 years. And yes, our peaks have gotten slightly smaller, but 2025's peak was higher than 2024's. So if you bought last year at the peak, guess what? More houses were selling this year than they were last year. I can't call that a crash. Now, the last piece of data I want to look at is something called months of inventory. So what months of inventory is comparing how many listings we have in the market compared to how many sales we have happening. So, for example, if in a given time period we have 10 listings and 5 sales, we would have 2 months of inventory, because if everything stopped moving and the sales rate continued, it would take 2 months to eat up all the listings. So as a general rule, anything over 6 months of inventory is a buyer's market. Anything under 3 months of inventory is a seller's market. So if we look at the data, January of 2020, there were 3.55 months of inventory, which means we were balanced, leaning towards a seller's market. Now, pandemic was coming, and again, we have our peaks and valleys in cottage country. We jumped up to 6.3 months of inventory, so just into a buyer's market, hung out and balanced for the beginning of COVID, and then the summer hit. We dropped from nearly a buyer's market to pretty much a seller's market the next month into very much a seller's market by July, right? So anytime you see months of inventory under 2 months is when you see the, we're holding offers, bring us all your offers. Doesn't really work if we have over 2 months of inventory. So that stuck around for quite some time. If you were in and around the real estate market during that time period. And then mid-2022 hit and things leveled out. We stayed in balanced territory for about a year. And then things slowed down, interest rates came up, and we had a lot of listings sitting on the market, but we still stayed in this balanced territory here, right? So when I step back and look at all this data, I can't sit here and justify saying, cottage country is collapsing. Prices are in free fall when the data shows they aren't. Now, you might have these one-off cases where, yes, you bought high and you can't keep it, you can't rent it, you can't sell it. So people are sitting here saying, what do? I guess I have to sell at all costs because that's my only out other than the bank taking it over. Now, I want to talk about the people who say, I can't sell it, I can't rent it, but I can't keep it. So of those three options, the only feasible option being sell it at a very steep loss. Now, there are some people who did get into the market before some of these short-term rental legislations did come into place in certain communities. And without knowing that was coming down the pipeline, I could see how some people might get in trouble if they bought a cottage with the intention of renting it out to supplement their mortgage payments so that they could afford to have a cottage. Now, I'm going to pick on Tiny Township. Yes, it's out of Muskoka, but I just want to use them as an example because right or wrong, I'm not here to answer the debate on who's right about these short-term rental legislations. Whatever the side of the fence you're on, I'm going to tell you what's going on. We had a lot of people in Tiny Township buy properties with the intention of using them as short-term rentals. Locals began to complain that, some of the guests were too loud, they were leaving trash all over the place, and wanted some kind of legislation in place to stop these kinds of short-term rentals from existing. So Tiny said, okay, we hear you loud and clear. We're going to put into effect a licensing requirement for short-term rentals. Now, Tiny in particular only issues a certain number of licenses, and once it's capped, they will not issue anymore. The process to apply for these licenses is quite expensive, and if you get anything wrong, good luck getting a refund on that application. So this legislation came out, and it put can't rent on the table. So what did all these people who couldn't rent it anymore do? Well, if they were in a financially stable position where they could carry the property, they said, you know what? Okay, we'll just use it as our cottage, or we'll rent it out for longer than 30 days and not have to abide by short-term rental regulations. So people who weren't in that financial position said, okay, well, I can't keep it, so my only other option is to sell it. So what happened is a lot of listings came to the market at the same time in Tiny Township. Now, what does this do? This drives up inventory. It drives up months of inventory, usually driving prices down. But people were still holding on to try and get a reasonable return. So average price in Tiny didn't come down a lot, but it still came down. And the reason it came down is the people who had to sell did sell at all costs. So that's when you see your headlines like, I bought at the peak of the pandemic and I had a $366,000 loss. Very unfortunate, a very aggressive loss, going to take years to recover from that. But at the same time, not to blame the victim here, but if you went into that investment without a longer than 5-year plan, being able to carry that property on your own, or at least with minimal rental income coming in from it, especially if you knew this legislation was coming down the pipeline, then I'm sorry, but that was a bad investment. So the last thing I want to touch on is, what does this mean for you if you've dreamed of owning a cottage or you have a cottage and you're kind of in this limbo of like, oh, I don't know what to do. Do we keep it? Do we sell it? Do we rent it? So if you're considering renting it, the first thing to know is if you rent it for longer than 30 days, you avoid any of that short-term rental regulation. So we see this quite often over in Collingwood. People will rent out a condo for a season. Collingwood's a big ski community, so people will rent it out from January to March. And then they have a place to go every weekend where they can, unpack, relax, and hit the slopes. Now, if you have a property or are buying a property and you do want to rent it, make sure you contact the town before you do anything else and find out what their short-term rental rules are, if they have any, because there are some towns who still don't have any, and also find out if they plan on implementing any. Now, if you're thinking of selling, if you bought prior to 2020, you're going to be just fine. If you've bought somewhere in the last 5 years, timing when you sell is going to be very important. It might mean holding on to it for an extra 6 months, year, or more. But if you have to sell sooner, you want to make sure you get that timing as good as possible, because as you know, in cottage country, we have peaks and we have valleys. Now, if you're looking to buy in cottage country, my number one suggestion is buy in a valley. They happen every year. We can predict them. It is when no one wants to drive to cottage country because there's snow everywhere and it's cold. But that's a great time to buy because sellers are generally motivated. So I hope this sheds some light on what's actually going on in cottage country. If you have any specific questions, you can book a call with me directly in the link below in the description of this video. Happy to set aside some time. We can chat about what's going on in your specific area, what your goals are, and how we can help you achieve them. Again, I'm Ben Robitaille. Thanks so much for watching this video, and we'll see you in the next one.